Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. With me here today to talk about the last race of 2020 is Twan.
Hello.
We'll be talking about the Cyclocross in Bredene, the Sylvester Cross or the Ethias Cross in Bredene, which wasn't the most exciting race. First we'll talk about the men's race, and there we had the whole start for Curtis White, but he quickly fell back. That gave us 4 leaders: Van der Poel, Aerts, Vanthourenhout and Vermeers. Not all big names were there. Some decided to take some rest, others were injured, but most decided to take some rest. And you could see that the riders that were starting there didn't have the intention to make it a very hard day of racing. So from these 4 leaders, it was first Vanthourenhout, who crashed and then had a chain drop and was dropped from that group. Vermeers then got dropped because Toon Aerts accelerated, which gave us 2 leaders, Van der Poel and Aerts. And just over halfway through the race, Toon Aerts had a front puncture, and that gave Van der Poel clear road to go on to claim another victory here. He won in front of Aerts. Vanthourenhout rode a recovery ride and ended 3rd there. So as we said, it's a busy time here and some riders decided to take some rest. How much effort do you think that Van der Poel put in here today to be able to grab this victory?
I felt like he was in cruise control for most of it. How much effort that would be. I think it's still, like, it will still hit home a bit, but of course it's not one of those days like he had in Namur where he had to go all the way to the line. I think he just found a rhythm that he was happy with and just was able to keep it going. He didn't even really have to accelerate because of that puncture. So I think all is good in the camp of Van der Poel.
I think it was a relatively easy day for Van der Poel in the office, at least compared to the tough races we had in Dendermonde, Namur and Herentals. But at the same time, I also feel like Toon Aerts wasn't giving it his absolute all during the race. I think they were really riding with their heads. I mean, there's some tough times coming up with 3 races that Van der Poel is all starting on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. He certainly was already thinking about those, and going 120% like in Dendermonde, that's really not something he will be wanting to do today.
Yeah, I think the added fact, of course, it not being a classification race, for example, Toon Aerts, he knows the moment he punctures, any chance of him winning the race is just out of the window. It would have been hard had he not punctured, but at least he would have had some sort of hope, I guess. But with that puncture, it's just completely gone, and the view goes to the 1st of January in Baal.
Which is, of course, a home race for Toon Aerts with his team changing names. It's going to be called Trek Baloise Lions or Baloise Trek. I'm not too sure on that, but I think he will definitely be focusing on that. But it was a pretty boring race, I think. You never really had the excitement. Of course, you had Van der Poel and Aerts together for a while, but you also had the feeling that Van der Poel was just comfortably sitting on the wheel, because the moment Aerts accelerated, there really wasn't any sort of moment that you could have had the feeling, oh, Van der Poel was going to break.
Yeah, I definitely felt that as well. He was just kind of waiting. I think everyone was kind of waiting for an acceleration of Van der Poel. I think the battle behind was a bit more interesting for the minor places, as it usually is with a cross with Van der Poel in it.
Well, let's take a look at who ended behind there, because behind Van der Poel, Aerts and Vanthourenhout, we found Gianni Vermeers in front of Tom Mills, who rode a super good second half of the race. Then we saw Dieter Zweek in 6th, Nicolas Cleppe in 7th, Merlier in 8th, Jentel Bekaert in 9th, and the 10th place went to Anton Ferdinande. Some new names here in the top 10. The first one I would like to point out here is Tim Merlier, who ended 8th. For while he showed some sort of liveness for the first time of the season, he was riding 5th until he crashed and then fell back a bit, but definitely some improvement to see at the end of Tim Merlier.
Yeah, I thought, of course you hope today that he gets something like a 5th place. He really should be able to get it in a field like this. Still isn't able to grab it, which is quite disappointing, but at least at some points there were some glimmers of hope.
Well, his teammate on the road, Vermeers, ended 4th. I mean, Vermeers and Merlier were both on the podium here last year. I mean, for Vermeers, I think he rode a pretty good race, just 2 seconds off the podium. He said in an interview himself he's beginning to feel more and more like a cyclocross rider and less like a road rider. So I think Vermeers is definitely someone we should keep an eye out on him for the remainder of the season, because especially on the slightly harder and tougher parcourses, I think Vermeers can definitely still be a threat for top 5 or podium places.
Yeah, of course, in stronger fields it will be hard, but I definitely hope to see him up there in some more races. He's really shown today that he can compete with, well, the likes of Vanthourenhout with a Baal fortune.
Then somebody you would like to talk about is the rider in 7th place, Nicolas Cleppe. He ended 7th here in what is potentially his last race, or at least he said himself it's his last race. His contract at Telenet didn't get extended. What do you think about the decision that they didn't extend his contract?
I think it's unfortunate. Nicolas Cleppe has been a solid rider, of course not the greatest rider, hasn't been having the greatest of seasons. It's come at a bad time for him, I guess. Contract being up at the end of the year. Put in a solid farewell ride, I guess. Very unfortunate to see a career end.
Well, it's very unfortunate for him that his contract didn't get extended because he put in a solid performance here today, and I think he is a very solid rider overall, and a lot of people say that he is definitely somebody who works hard, and maybe he's just not the most talented guy, but he makes up for the lack of talent with hard work. That's what they are saying. Commentator at VTM, Rob Peters, also said that he thinks that there might be a team watching this and have seen this performance thinking that they still should give him a contract. I think it's the obvious team that could give him a contract is Group Hens Maas Containers. What do you think about that option?
Yeah, I think they have quite a few riders which have the same kind of profile. They aren't the greatest, but on their day they can get some nice results, and they still, in most cases, have some margin for progression. And I think he fits this category. Outside of them, I think there's also some more teams, minor teams with maybe some ambition that could have a very solid pickup here.
I also think that the fact that he's only 25 makes it extra sad, because I think there's definitely some potential to become a solid top 10 rider for him. And I also think it's unfortunate that he doesn't choose to, or doesn't have the financial funds to ride the rest of the season as a free agent in a black kit, like Jens Adam does with some private sponsors, because then he could have stayed in the picture. And if you remember back in the days, it was Vincent Baastans who drove a couple of races like that as well. And look, eventually, after 2 years of riding with private sponsors and funding himself, he ended up having his own team. So it's very unfortunate the way that things have gone for Nicolas Cleppe. Then honorable mention for the two riders who rounded off the top 10, Jentel Bekaert and Anton Ferdinande. Strong ride by these under 23 riders to really take the most out of the situation when a bunch of other people who usually end in the top 10 aren't there. Well, then we can talk about the women's race. In the women's race, we had a pretty dominant showing by Vos. Tell us about it, Twan.
It was a quick start by Vos. She had a nice 13 seconds after the first lap, managed to double that advantage in the next, even with a mistake in there. It was Alicia Franck that was chasing her for large parts of the race, with Cant and Honsinger nearby, and as they went into the final lap, it was those three that would battle it out for second place. Cant and Honsinger catching up with Alicia Franck, and Alicia Franck not quite having it, Cant moving past her and taking that second place, leaving Franck and Honsinger to battle it out for the final podium spot. It would be Franck that crashed in one of the very last corners, but she was able to battle back, get onto the wheel of Honsinger and outsprint her to the line.
Well, the battle for second place was definitely more exciting than the battle for the win, mainly because Catablanca Vash was super strong today. And I should say Vash because that's the correct pronunciation of the name, and I will try to do my best for that, but it was a super dominant showing.
Yeah, it was her Van der Poel impression. Really impressive ride today. Really got into her rhythm, was able to ride her own race, and the result shows it.
Well, you're really correct with that, because even that crash, it didn't really seem to hamper her. She lost a solid 15 or 20 seconds with the crash and getting her chain back on. But in the end, she still had 20 or 30 seconds lead that lap and winning with 1 minute 14 over Sanne Cant. Really strong. But the battle for second place, that was a bit more exciting. For a long time, Alicia Franck was in second place, but in the last lap, she looked to have been maybe overshooting herself a bit in the first laps of the race, and Cant and Honsinger managed to catch up to her. What are your conclusions about this battle here, Twan?
I think Alicia Franck hadn't quite divided her energy the right way. Really seemed to be running out a little, and then this little motivation that Cant managed to get, really getting that fighter's instinct on, and passing Alicia Franck, as Alicia Franck just, I don't know, it gave a bit of a... It wasn't really giving up, but it really looked like all the energy and the fight had kind of gone. But she was able to, get back on it for the final sprint, which was amazing to see.
Well, I think it's definitely good for her. She got her first podium in almost a year, and the same goes for Cant. It's been more than 300 days for both since they last scored a podium. They will definitely take some confidence out of this. For Honsinger, I was slightly more disappointed. She lost a lot in the start, like she usually does, and this time she couldn't really get in the rhythm as well. And I don't think that this is the perfect parcours for her. She needs it a bit harder and a bit more on the raw power. But fourth, I mean, it's not great, but it's not bad either.
Yeah, I think it's just a solid performance, and I think this is kind of her level on what is not as tough cross. I think she is one of the best in the world when it gets really tough, when it's really about all the power. And yeah, we saw it in the sprint. There was just not a lot of acceleration there.
And we also have to say it's the first time since Bredene exactly last year that there's a full podium without any Dutch riders on it. And I mean, of course, the obvious reason is that Brandt, Alvarado, Worst, those riders aren't there. But in the end, it's good to see some other people standing on the podium for once.
Yeah, the big factor, I guess the biggest factor really is that for the Netherlands, it really was just Van Alphen and Royakkers today. Although Van Alphen on her best day would definitely be in the fight for the podium, but she has slowly declined as the season has gone on, really making a step though since last year.
She ended 5th here, so that gives us an opportunity to look at the entire top 10. Vos, Cant, Franck, Honsinger, Van Alphen are the names we already mentioned. In 6th we find the under 23 world champion Ribeyrolles in front of her teammate Anna Kay. Champion of Luxembourg, Christine Majerus in 8th in front of Arzoufi, and Rebecca Faringer in 10th. So, what names here in this top 10 stand out to you?
Honestly, I mean, maybe Majerus a little. I think she's done well here. Kay a little bit disappointing, finishing behind her teammate, who she has been better than, I would say, for the most part of the season. And Aerts again, not really showing what I would like her to show, especially with this kind of field.
Well, it's really hard to actually say something about that part of the race because we didn't really have a lot of shots from it. We've only really seen the leader and the battle for second. I mean, we got some shots of Van Alphen and Ribeyrolles. Kay was there for some part of the race as well. Compton was there as well, actually for quite some part of the race. Some improvement on her side until her tube lost the contact with the tire in the last lap and she needed to run. She eventually ended 11th. It's really not the season for Compton so far, is it?
Yeah, so far it's really looking like it's been a season too many. Of course, it's harder because you've had COVID, of course, which ruined a lot of the preparation, I would assume. So maybe she can come good, going toward the World Championships, and after with some crosses that will be probably having similar fields like this, and maybe we'll see some nice results like top 5s.
I mean, the season to March for Compton, it's been said quite some times, and every time she managed to bounce back. And I think today also showed that she's still a good rider, maybe not as good as she was last year, where she was challenging for podiums and ended 4th at the World Championships. But that's not a shame if you're 42 years old in your penultimate season that you're racing. If you're still managing to get in that top 10 quite often, I think you can be happy, and the field is getting stronger and stronger. And if you don't have the perfect preparation, it will just make it harder and harder to be able to compete. Then we've come to the last point of this podcast, the short preview on the X2O Badkamers Trofee in Baal of January 1st. So that's tomorrow if you're listening to this podcast on the 31st of December. The parcours in Baal, it's almost an exact copy. I can only spot a few minor changes, but it's the traditional parcours here at the Baalerberg like we've seen it the last 3 or 4 years, with the famous pump track downhill, which will definitely provide for some nice shots. And if you're looking at this at the start list for the men's race, all the big names are there. We can see Van der Poel at the start list, but also Van Aert. Pidcock is on the start list as well as Iserbyt if he is able to start after his crash in Zolder. I think we could be in for a real good race here, especially if there's some mud.
Yeah, I think we can expect a nice race between Van der Poel and Van Aert. Hopefully Pidcock is able to get up in there, and then I think we'll see those three have a nice battle, and quite a few people having a good fight for the rest of the places. Don't think if Iserbyt starts that he will be quite there. Of course, his body in recovery mode after what happened in Zolder. So I think even if he starts, it will be for a nice top 10 classification, but we shouldn't expect too much.
Also expect that Van der Poel won't be going 110% immediately from the start. He's racing Friday, Saturday and Sunday is probably the most important race, the World Cup in Hulst, that determines the starting positions for the World Championships. I think he just wants to be at the top 8, so it's not even sure if he will start over Overijse. So he will really want to get that win there. So I don't think he will go full out immediately, and that could give an open race because Van Aert is dangerous.
Yeah, you saw it in Dendermonde. Van Aert has got the edge when we are talking just raw power numbers. And Baal is definitely one of those courses where if it's muddy, that's definitely a very big factor.
Especially with the climbing on the Baalerberg. And I think we should just wait and see what will happen there. Corné van Kessel could be in for a decent showing as well if it's muddy. Then a short look ahead at the women's race. I think everyone is there as well. We see Alvarado, Worst, Brandt, Betsema, Vash. Everyone's on the start list. I think there we should be in for another battle between Brandt, Alvarado, perhaps Worst and Betsema as well.
Yeah, I think if she gets a good start, add Clara Honsinger to that list of people that could play a role. Of course, she is shown in similar courses on on how tough the course is, that she can compete with the best, so I think she can maybe put in a podium ride again.
And don't forget, A.V. Richards was pretty strong in Namur. She went to England and now she's back here. She's on the start list as well. I think she could potentially do something here as well.
Yeah, of course, A.V. Richards, a very dangerous rider, very good, very talented, and hopefully she can put in one hell of a performance.
Well, then I think we've had it all for Baal. And actually also for Bredene. Twan, thank you for talking about cyclocross once again with me.
Thank you for having me on.
And then we'll be back the day after tomorrow with a podcast about the X2O Trofee in Baal, where we will, fingers crossed, have a more exciting race to talk about. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great New Year's Eve, and then I will see you guys for the next podcast. Goodbye.